Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New York Energy Week Solar Breakfast 2014. It's an awesome week so far, and again, we have standing room only. In case you haven't met yet, my name is Angelique Mercurio, and I'm the CEO and founder of EnerKnol, the tech startup behind New York Energy Week. We started New York Energy Week to further stimulate collaboration as part of our mission to drive forward investment in the energy industry. Today's crowd is testament to the leadership that we have here in the energy industry right here in New York. And this morning, I'd like to thank a few people, everyone involved. The New York Energy Week Steering Committee has been a huge driving force behind this. NYSERDA, our founding partner, Advent, our brand partner, our Terawatt sponsors, Breitling Energy and Con Edison, Morgan Stanley, our wonderful host for this morning's event, especially Jorge Vargas, and the EnerKnol team, of course. And I invite all of you after this to meet the EnerKnol team and test drive our software in the next room at the demo station. It's a lot of fun. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rick Talman, who is the chairman of Main Street Power, who will be offering opening remarks for all.
Well, good morning, everyone. Wisely, I've been given 4 or 5 minutes to welcome you guys here, so I'll save the treatise for another time. But I'm here to, on behalf of our good friends and partners at Morgan Stanley and the Solar Desk, sitting over here to my left, Jess and Jorge, we've been through thick and thin together over the last 5 years. We started a little company in Colorado 5 years ago called Main Street Power, and 5 years hence with a lot of work in the trenches with these incredible people here at the Solar Desk for Morgan Stanley. We've accumulated about $300 million worth of operating solar assets on our balance sheet, which we own and operate out of our operations center in Boulder. And we could not have done it without you guys, so thank you very much. And they asked me to stand up here on their behalf and welcome you all to this fantastic event. And the topic of the day is the solar tipping point. Are we there yet? What does that look like? What does it even mean? As is often the case with tipping points, when you're in it, you can't see it. Only with the lens of history can you really figure out when all of that happened. And I'm not really sure, to some degree it matters, because one thing is for sure, we're all making history here in this industry. Things are completely different than they were a decade ago, and certainly 5 years ago, in the middle of a really difficult recession, when we started our company and right at the bottom. And the good news about that is there's only one way to go, and that's up. And I think the entire industry has seen that. And so to get the juices flowing, to get some thoughts provoked, we have this amazing panel here to share their ideas and their thoughts on the subject, and what's it really going to take to get this industry where it needs to be. We're going to talk about technology and this incredible nexus that we're seeing between photovoltaics and solar thermal and electric cars and energy efficiency technologies and transit-based development technologies. And all of this coming together to really form a different vision for how an American family will get their energy over the next century. It's very exciting. We're going to talk about economics and how every month, every quarter, another market in the United States passes that line into grid parity. And although a lot of major markets are there, we're seeing more and more as time comes. As EV gets cheaper, fossil fuels get more expensive, the inevitable is happening, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about politics and policy, and maybe not getting anything done in Washington these days, but certainly at the local and state level, there's some really exciting policy innovations that are happening that we can all share, we can all borrow, we can all learn from. And to me, walking over here this morning, what really struck me is there's no more perfect place than New York City to be having this conversation. I mean, this is literally blocks from here is where Tom Edison flipped the first switch, electrified the first house, and started this mess. And so let's say we have a history of technology innovation here. It is a global financial center. We're sitting in the global headquarters of Morgan Stanley here having this conversation. It is a political hotbed, with a long history of really interesting and exciting policy innovations. And in my mind, the most important thing is it is also one of the most diverse cities in the world, because one of the greatest challenges I believe we have in getting past the solar tipping point, it isn't financial, and it's not political, and it's not technical, it's cultural. And only when we can really talk in cultural terms that people get and understand will we really get people to accept what we're doing and take it to the next level. And so with that, welcome everybody. I think it's going to be a really interesting and exciting morning, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Rick, for setting the stage. So the theme for this morning's panel debate is, are we at a tipping point for solar to go mainstream? When we look back a decade ago, solar manufacturing and installations were taking off. The 2005 Energy Policy Act created a 30% investment tax credit, and I know all of you had read the policy primers that we sent to you in advance in preparation for today. Banks and law firms began setting up clean tech and renewable energy practices, a sure sign that a robust market is coming. But then solar weathered through the decade of the shale gas revolution, as we discussed yesterday morning, the financial crisis, and some high-profile bankruptcies. And we look at where we are today, declining costs upstream with PV modules and downstream with installation and financing. Strong policy support. Electric utilities face 30% cuts in CO2 emissions by 2030 compared to 2005, according to EPA estimates of the proposed ruling issued 2 weeks ago, which leads to high prices and high expectation of prices for conventional electricity, particularly here in New York. And so what we'll be discussing here is, are we experiencing an inflection point for solar technologies, markets, and regulation, and therefore an inflection point for electric utilities as well? And so it's indeed an exciting time to be here in the solar industry. And in that context, we are very pleased to have you join us here this morning, and pleased by this phenomenal panel that New York Energy Week has assembled, who are on the cutting edge of these things. We have Jigar Shah, founder of Sun Edison, and Jigar recently published the book Creating Climate Wealth, and recently nominated by Governor Cuomo to serve on the board of NYSERDA. We have Lawrence Mackler, the founder and CEO of Solera Generation, solar developer of the largest PV carport systems in the US, and architect behind the award-winning solar canopy system in my local Brooklyn Whole Foods market. We have Eli Hinckley, the head of global energy finance for the law firm Sullivan & Worcester, who has been on the forefront of alternative energy and policy and teaches at Georgetown University. And finally, we have Karen Hamilton, a veteran at NYSERDA, the market development arm of New York State's energy efficiency and renewable energy programs, and Karen directs their residential energy services. So prepare your questions now, but I want to begin with a couple of questions to the panelists before we open up the session to the audience. So let's open up with each of your reflections on where were you 10 years ago with respect to solar, and what's your biggest surprise since then? And what's your outlook in the next 10 years for solar technologies, markets, and regulations from this key point in the sector's transformation? Eli, let's start with you.
Sure, and I'm going to actually only go back about 7.5 or 8 years ago. I was at the time the leader of the alternative energy practice for Deloitte US, and we were working with a small, very small solar startup based out in California, trying to take this idea of photovoltaics and put them on residences. Seemed like a long shot to everybody. They wanted us to make an investment in them in terms of the time we were willing to put in. I could not, for anything, convince my colleagues, my partners, to do that. So they got frustrated with us, moved on. Today that's Solar City. So it gives you a sense of sort of how quickly some of this changes. That's my story.
Excellent. Jigar, what are your observations?
So 10 years ago, we started South Edison. So the industry, I think, has moved pretty fast in 10 years. I think that the thing that I love about this industry is we really do work independently of all these other trends. It's extraordinary to me how many people try to say that natural gas actually has an impact on us, or this has an impact on us, or that has an impact on us. And as many of you know, it's completely untrue. Our highest growth rates in the United States came during the shale gas boom. So it's not tied together. What we're tied to is that 90% of all of the commerce done in the solar industry is originated by companies that are less than 10 years old. 90%, right? So that's all of you guys. And I just think that's really the magic of the solar industry, is that there's absolutely no benefit for being a 100-year-old company entering this space. The benefit is really from people who just have a passion and a dream and a desire to put 100% to work every day, convincing their neighbors and their friends and their colleagues to move to solar power. And then, of course, there's a lot of 100-year-old firms that would love to invest in your projects. But it's a lot of you guys that are really doing that. And that's, I think, the real key to the solar industry is how democratic it has been this entire 10-year period. It really is just, one person, one vote.
Thank you. And Lawrence, can you comment on your future outlook in terms of technology and design systems? And what's my parking lot at Whole Foods going to look like?
Sure, I'll go 10 years back and go 10 years forward. Like that's so I think actually the parking lot is an energy well, and I think if you're resourceful and innovative, you can actually see power coming from below the earth, which you get it from a geothermal, and it's coming from above for PV and electric. So I think that parking lot is going to be a whole new energy source and integrated to the building, and things beyond our imagination, because if you look at the parking space and what's going on with electric transportation and Google with 700,000 miles of driverless cars, that parking space is not going to be 8 feet wide or 9 feet wide. It'll be just enough to slip your car in, and you'll be dropped off at the front door. I think a lot of things we can imagine will be in our benefit. If you look at your iPhone 10 years ago, that didn't exist, so now we have GPS in our hands. That car space is an opportunity, that parking lot is an opportunity for energy, retail, and that will help us with this tipping point on the economics, because it's a resource that we really just started to tap into.
Thank you. And then for Karen, with the administration's additional billion-dollar commitment to the funding for New York Sun, what should we expect the New York solar market to look like in 10 years in respect to residential solar?
So 10 years from now, we hope to be, or by 2020, we hope to be getting out of the incentive business. 10 years ago, we hadn't even gotten into the incentive business, and by now we want to be moving out. We had been focusing on some specific market interventions, looking at what the barriers were, and 10 years ago, we were looking at what is a quality installation, how do we develop quality training, and look how far we've come now. We've got great training programs in New York. That shouldn't even be an issue by 2020. So the market has really moved, and we're looking to that self-sustaining industry by 2020 that's not going to require these kinds of interventions anymore.
Thank you. And in last night's opening ceremony of New York Energy Week, we discussed New York's recently announced Reforming the Energy Vision, or REV, which addresses the challenge of our aging grid and the 100 or so year utility model based on unidirectional power flow, and the move towards a more decentralized and market-based structure. And 3 weeks ago, Barclays had downgraded U.S. utility bonds. Both announcements featured distributed solar quite prominently as a challenger and a risk to the U.S. utilities industry. Jigar, have you seen these changes, and what are your views on the utility shifting role?
Yeah, well, Eli wrote a great piece on the Barclays downgrade, so I'll leave it to Eli to talk about that, I think. But I was with National Grid last night and at a different dinner, and what's interesting on the REV program is that they've got, for instance, the oldest transmission line in the United States that they run, which was built sort of by Thomas Edison, and that line actually runs in a conduit that I think was built around the 1860s. And so for them, they're being asked, do you want to upgrade that by $100 million? Or do you really just want to build a microgrid for the 3 towns at the end of the line that you're really upgrading the grid for, right? And that's the core of REV, right? So the core is all of you have technology. The utility has a standard way of doing business that the Public Service Commission has acknowledged actually provides somewhat reliable power. And so the question really becomes, at what point do they actually have the right to use your technology to meet the needs of the utility without getting a whole bunch of pushback, right? In New York State, utilities can't own generation, but could they own distributed generation? Could they own microgrids? Could they own things that aren't traditional generation? These are the kinds of questions that I think REV's going to answer. The other big question that I think all of you should have on your minds from a paradigm shift standpoint is almost all of the electric utility companies in the United States and around the world manage the grid using supply side mechanisms, right? So if you use more demand, they turn on a peaker or they turn on some generator. In the future, that's not how this is going to go. I mean, when you look at EnerKnol and Converge and Itron and O-Power and Nest and all these other guys, what they're trying to do is to say, instead of turning on a peaker, why not just use demand response and load control, which is far cheaper. And so we achieve the same level of dexterity on the demand side that we currently enjoy on the supply side. And that, I think, is also part of REV. And if you'll permit me one more thing, I mean, I do think that for those of you who are passionate about the work we're doing in New York State, this state is by far more interested in solving this problem than any other state in the country. I mean, I would say that with Audrey doing the work that she's doing at the Public Service Commission, with Richard Kaufman as the energy czar, we have a structured approach to figuring out how to answer this question for investors in a way that California, New Jersey, a lot of other states are not actually doing. And so this is your chance to get really involved with what the future is going to look like. So I hope all of you, really pay attention to the REV process and participate.
Thank you. And Karen, can you tell us how you see the role PV will play in New York's reforming energy vision?
I think that PV is going to give consumers and businesses an opportunity to get involved in their utility service in a way they never did before. I mean, people get their bills right now, and a lot of people don't even know that they have any control over the amount of energy that they're using. And as REV progresses and we start looking at microgrids and we start looking at distributed energy, I think people are going to become more aware of how they're using energy every day. They're going to think about energy efficiency more. They're going to think about that PV system. It's going to give the utilities an opportunity to really value distributed energy resources differently, and it's going to change their relationship with their customers. People are going to just become a lot more aware and involved in how the utility services are provided. So, I think it's going to be great for the public to become a lot more educated, and I think it's really an opportunity for the utilities to optimize how they're providing service to their customers.
And how about you, Lawrence? Where are you going to fit into New York's reforming energy vision?
We're going to fit in. We're actually, as Jigar once said, you have to have an innovative business model. So although we're branded as the carport, we're also looking at roof space, use our expertise and ground mounts so we can take advantage of the good policy that's here in New York. And we'll also co-develop projects. So we're based here in New York and we want to optimize we're based here in California, but here's a great opportunity. So.
Okay. And Eli, with where is distributed solar on that spectrum between non-threatening to the so-called downward death spiral of the utility?
Well, this is cultural. I think Rick's point is a great one. Some of this is cultural in terms of how does the consumer, as Karen points out, is how the consumer relates to their energy use, energy provider. But the culture runs deeper than that too. And when you think about the energy world, right? The energy world moves on decade or century type shifts. It moves slowly. It historically moved very slowly. And we have run into that as technology, which moves incredibly fast. We were having a conversation last night at the event, and talking about new technology, the next generation of solar technology, when does that come along? And that could be 5 or 10 years. And that seems like forever from a technology cycle. And you can't get investment for that because it takes too long. But in the energy world, that's lightning fast. And so you have a real cultural gap here that the utilities are having, and traditional energy providers generally are having a hard time keeping up with it. So there is a threat there. Now, there's certainly an opportunity as well, and we'd like to see them transition and find their way to that opportunity, because the disruption, if they don't make the transition quickly enough, is a dangerous one. But and I guess the other piece is it's a split in two ways. It's distributed versus centralized model, and that model is at some risk, not absolute risk. So you look at a place like this, you can't distribute all of your power in Manhattan. It's just not going to happen. So you're still going to have a role for utilities in a lot of settings. But there are places where there is absolutely a risk at the margin. And the other is technology versus fire. I mean, this is a fundamental shift in the way we make energy. And both of those are new concepts for the traditional energy markets.
If I add something.
Yeah, please.
For those of you guys who haven't read Eli's last piece on the Barclays downgrade, you should definitely read it. It's a real insight to what impact that actually has on the borrowing costs of utilities and lots of other pieces. But one of the things that I would say is that I love solar power, and I think I think that comes through in a lot of my work. But I think that the part that people are missing is when Barclays talks about solar, they really shouldn't be talking only about solar. What solar really is sort of the tip of the spear around distributed generation. And whether it's heat pumps or geothermal, or whether it's combined heat and power, which I think is going to make a heroic comeback in the United States over the next 4 years, I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of folks who actually are using their site, whether it's their parking lot or whether it's their building and their natural gas consumption, to generate their own power. And I think it's because of solar and because of all the enthusiasm in this room that folks are actually looking at DG more broadly. Utilities effectively killed combined heat and power back in the 80s with standby chargers. And it's because of the people in this room that we're going to roll a lot of that stuff back. And I don't think they're going to say thank you, but they probably should.
But that's a point that can't be underemphasized. This is not a solar-only shift. This is a distributed technology shift, and it's all kinds of technologies, from power generation to power consumption to storage. And we're seeing those technologies mature, or we're seeing regulatory policy shift quickly. So when you think about this transition, don't think about it as simply solar versus traditional utilities, which is it's kind of a different argument, because solar is intermittent. It only produces electricity when the sun shines. When you start to think of a full suite of technologies on site, with a full set of technologies that work, the role of distributed generation changes dramatically.
So when we think about this, going back to the 10-year outlook, I mean, what to make of baseload power? This is a phantom going forward.
Well, I mean, baseload power doesn't exist and never has existed, right? And so, I mean, I'm an engineer by training, and when we took our classes in power, none of the textbooks actually used the word baseload. So baseload is an artifact of the press and sort of folks who didn't want to use a more complicated description of what we have. Coal plants in the United States basically have roughly a 77% availability if they're really well maintained. About half of the 23% that they're unavailable is planned, and about half of it's unplanned. So the reason we have redundant power systems and we have excess capacity is because they're highly unreliable and not baseload. The only technologies that really are baseload are nuclear, and even in that case, that's actually sometimes problematic, right? If you have a tremendous amount of wind power coming onto the grid and the nuclear power plant still has to produce its power, then you get negative wholesale power prices in some places, like in Texas and other places. And so there is no such thing as baseload power. The electricity, basically, supply always has to equal demand, and we do have a horrendous problem with storage. But I think that what you find that the utilities are most sort of surprised by is that because of the advent of the internet and the advent of mobile phone, you can actually manage a grid with more than 12 generators. right? You can manage a grid with 1 million generators. Each one actually has an IP address. Each one basically can be controlled 50,000 units at a time. Each one can be managed by the grid operators. But in PG&E's territory, for instance, the grid operation still does not acknowledge that solar actually exists on their grid in PG&E's territory. In '07, when we passed the California Solar Initiative, we were mandated by law to actually generate 15-minute data to be able to provide to PG&E and the California ISO. Neither one of them actually even acknowledges that distributed generation is on their grid. They use distributed generation and actually view it as energy efficiency on their grid, right? I mean, when Energy Information Administration actually publishes data, they deliberately don't publish how much distributed generation we actually add every quarter. So when they publish data, they're only adding QF facilities, which are utility scale. It's that cultural problem that we have that Eli's talking about that's going to cause us the most problems, because it's not that the data is not there, it's that the integration of that data in terms of how we actually create reliable power isn't being done. It's not that the software doesn't exist, it's just that the culture hasn't changed.
So if you take the idea of taking those distributed generation local power plants integrated with the software and take a look at the economics of what solar's come from $7.50 a watt, which we did 4 years ago, now to $2.65, $2.70. The economics work on the PV side. Battery storage is soon to follow. So if you take battery storage and I don't want to say base load, but you have enough energy supply to actually feed the U.S. And I'll give you one metric. A year ago, we were at a similar event in front of bankers, and they only talk in millions, and we can talk in billions and trillions. There's enough actually existing. You took 50% of the asphalt in the U.S., just 50% of it, you have enough to decommission every single coal-fired power plant. So there's an energy opportunity already sitting there with the technology of battery and with the technology of integrating the system so you actually can feed your power accordingly into the communities as needed. The answer is there. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen, as Jigger said, with people in this room and the economics behind it.
Solar freaking carports.
Wish we could end there, but there's a couple more questions. So we mentioned investments are taking too long or have taken too long. We are seeing a secondary market emerge with solar securitization and yieldcos designed to make solar even more attractive, and particularly for investors who are looking to lessen their exposure to fuel volatility. Eli and Jigar, what are your comments on that, and what can we expect in terms of additional innovations we can expect into solar financing to drive Wall Street investment to renewable energy?
Sure, and I'll leave most of this to Jerry because he's spending a lot of time working on trying to harness ways to bring that cost of capital down in a variety of different settings. But we are seeing some absolute progress on new financial tools being used in the marketplace to access cheaper capital, especially in the secondary markets. We've seen the first couple of yieldcos happen. SunEdison has announced that they're going to do a fairly large one. SunPower's working on one. There's some others, Linear Trust and others that are working on yieldco models. SolarCity's done a securitization. All this is based on the fundamental notion that solar is, in some ways, the perfect asset for a safe yield vehicle. PV is inert, there are no moving parts, not a lot of risk in terms of operations. Your credit, it's all done on long-term contracts, so the credit risk profile is just that of your off-taker. So if you can build a pool of credit-worthy off-takers, what you have is something that looks a lot like that credit-worthy pool of off-takers would issue a bond. And so the idea that you can push these things in the secondary market is sort of an obvious evolution of the industry. And we're seeing that happen. And that, of course, in turn is having the benefit of bringing the cost of capital down for the development and deployment of solar, which makes solar more competitive, which accelerates this competition with traditional sources.
So I think that the part that confuses people the most about this stuff is I think there's a lot of folks who believe that there's this sort of hand-waving, quality to sort of the yieldco. I think that when you think through the people in your life who are, filing for Social Security and, getting their sort of retirement underway, the options that they have available today, are pretty slim. The U.S. Treasury market this year has gone from a 3% yield to roughly 2.5% yield, while stock prices have gone up. Never really happen, right? When stock prices go up, bond yields usually go up. The fact that they're diverging means that if you're 64 and you're thinking about filing for Social Security and you're looking for a decent rate of return into your retirement, Prudential is offering you 3.5% for life, right? That sucks, right? You've been actually working your ass off for your entire life. You've got $2 million to your name. You're technically an accredited investor. And you're going to make 3.5% when you were told by your financial advisor you'd be making 7%, right? Because of the financial crisis, there's no way in hell you're going to own stocks, right? So you missed this entire run, right? Those are the people that are driving the work that we do and the reason why we're getting low cost capital, right? Today it's pension funds. Today it's impact investors. Today it's insurance companies. Today it's other people that are buying. But tomorrow it's going to be Fidelity. It's going to be the successors to sort of J.D. Edwards and all those folks who are selling $50,000 units and $100,000 units to your loved ones. And that's what's driving this. A year ago, SunEdison announced in one of their quarterly calls that we've done 1,200 projects today. Of course, it's more, but a year ago it was 1,200 projects, not a single failure in 10 years, right? Not one. When you talk to the folks at Morgan Stanley or the folks at other places, you ask them how much of your portfolio has gone bad, it's infinitesimally small, right? Everybody else, when they're doing natural gas or something else on their spreadsheet, always has a loss reserve. It's like, well, we just assume 4% of our projects are going bad. We don't assume that 4% of our projects are going bad, because 4% of our projects don't go bad. That's how ridiculously reliable we are as an industry. And so it's all about first principles. This isn't about a fad. This isn't about, we're doing yield codes because it's cool and there's a whole bunch of dumb people out there. This is about figuring out how to get people the sort of low risk, long-term, stable cash flows that they want to use to retire on, to be able to provide retirement income on if you're a pension fund. And that's what we're solving, and that's why there's so much insatiable appetite for the yields that we're producing.
If I could add just a quick little story that ties us back to the cultural piece too. A colleague of mine and I, John Franklin, wrote a piece on securitization and what that was going to mean for the solar market. And there was a comment, one of the places where the article went up, from a utility C-level executive, utility executive, which was basically financial innovation is just an artificial way to lower the price of solar. Think about that for a minute.
Discuss amongst yourselves.
Lawrence, what are your views from the trenches on solar financing?
On solar financing, it's a lot more complex than the engineering behind the structure, I can tell you from our point of view. And it should be simpler in the same way we talked about credit rating of off-takers. I think the residential market is doing great because you can get a FICO score. For us to find a qualified off-taker is challenging. We've done a lot of the Fortune 100s. That's easy. They're a good credit rating or they have a good tax appetite. It's actually reaching out to the broader people who don't. And that's actually, I think, where there's a great opportunity. We can figure out a system. Jigger said earlier that they're working with Dun & Bradstreet, but if you actually could not have to rely on that off-taker's credit that you can feed into the grid as an alternative, that's not my level of expertise, but when that does occur, this will help further accelerate where we are.
Let me just add to that for a second. I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion in the marketplace on, basically what we've done in the United States. As someone who's, has to take responsibility for some of our mistakes and some of our successes, I'm happy to own up to it. I think that when you think about what's happening in Germany and other places right now, they did that model where they basically got someone else to provide the credit. That's what a feed-in tariff is, right? They basically pushed the credit to the state. So if somebody went out of business, as long as their roof was still available to generate power into the grid, you still got paid. We didn't do that here in the United States. We actually forced the banking community to figure us out. And I think I did the first Goldman Sachs deal in 2005, and so basically 9 years later, they have figured us out. A lot of these intricacies and a lot of these things that we're talking about are things that they're willing to underwrite here in the US that they're not willing to underwrite in Germany. Most of the German banks have not figured this out. The reason Sun Edison and other people are doing so well in Germany is because they're not using German bank money. Because the German banks have said, unless it's a feed-in tariff, unless it's basically guaranteed risk on the other side, we're not going to underwrite the deal. So I think the level of sophistication that we have in this marketplace is due to the fact that this marketplace is hard. And so that means that all of you have to get just a little bit smarter on that level of financial sophistication. And you have to actually chase customers that meet the criteria that the banks actually have set down. Now, I think the banks have done a horrendous job of actually explaining to you what that criteria is. Most banks in the US basically say, show me all 100 projects and I'll actually tell you which 46 meet my criteria without actually explaining to you why the 46 hit the criteria. I think that's going to change in the next 6 to 9 months because they frankly have a lot of competition who are being a little bit more open and transparent about what they're underwriting. But that will get solved. But I think you should be very proud of the fact that because we took the road less traveled, the harder road here in the United States, we are by far the market share leaders around the world, whether it's South Africa, India, Chile, Brazil. We're the ones who figured all this stuff out, not the Europeans. The Europeans haven't gotten a lot of market share around the world because they actually can't figure out the first principles on the finance side without relying on a credit enhancement from a AAA, rated government. And so I like the fact that we're complex. I think that you guys should embrace the fact that we've got 50 states with 50 regulations. It makes you stronger. And that's why our industry is, I think, far more robust than a lot of the industries around the world.
So you have a couple of call to actions from the panelists, so please prepare your questions soon. I'm going to end with one last question. So clearly a chief benefit of speaking on a panel is the magic wands that you receive. So with this one, how should we as a nation construct our solar policies in the future? Karen, maybe it makes sense for you to kick things off.
So obviously, we've made a good start with Governor Cuomo's New York Sun initiative. It's a long-term commitment to the industry so that, we can work through our challenges, work through the barriers, and over the long run, create a self-sustaining industry. Now what we have to do is kind of using that as a base, take a more comprehensive look. As has been said before, solar doesn't stand on its own. We have to look at distributed energy resources as a whole, including energy efficiency, and we can't be stovepiped in our policy approach. Through the Reforming the Energy Vision proceeding that the Public Service Commission has undertaken, we're taking a look at how the utilities are going to operate in the future, and all of these things have to come together. But a critical part of developing our policy for the future is to have the conversation with the industry. We have to make sure that our policies are going to work for the industry. Policy shouldn't be something that we're doing to the industry, but rather supports the industry. And I think at this point in time, it's even more critical that we hear from everybody who has a stake in our future policies and really be very comprehensive in our approach.
Eli?
So, if I got the magic wand, I cast a slightly broader brush, and I say, let's take a look at all the inputs from the energy industry, all the outputs, figure out what those real costs are. Right? That's a price on carbon, that's a price on other externalities for burning fossil fuels, and use that as the baseline and work from that. And the idea behind subsidies for solar were twofold. One was to provide some impetus to get the industry up and going, and the second was to levelize what was inherently accepted as an unlevel playing field. So to do it with them all together doesn't really work because you never fix the playing field problem. But if you start this from scratch and say, okay, let's look at the marketplace, figure out what the right place to build a market from is, and start there, and then you can start to make some nuanced decisions about how you incentivize various technologies. That's the right model. It's also fantasy, but you asked.
Why do you want?
So instead of taking a broad stroke, I think actually this big policy is important. I'll take a very narrow one. As Jim said, it's a hard industry and we work very hard. We all do work very hard. It's hard to make your margins. It's hard to be successful. So let's just put that hard energy towards things that are more innovative than permitting. If we just took permitting alone and we're on the same level field as putting an oil derrick, which requires no permit in the Uniform Building Code, that's us. We spend $100,000 on interconnect studies, on permitting. Let's actually facilitate that in the policy.
So for those of you who actually believe that we live in a federal sort of society, I think that you should look at the fact that, electricity markets are really managed at the state level in the United States. There's 50 states. What's shocking to me is how many people sort of say, oh, but Europe has national policy or, continental policy. I mean, for those of you who compared the Czech Republic's, programs to Lithuania and Estonia, to Germany, know that they're actually state by state as well. So, for me, I think I've done well by reserving my magic wand for things like world peace, and not reserving it for this industry. I think that, the magic wand in this industry comes from your enthusiasm. The thing that shocks me the most, like for instance on permitting, whenever we've had challenges on permitting, all we've done is found a city resident to actually go to the mayor and the city council and explain how hard it is there, and they generally reverse their policy and make it easier for solar. There are very few cities and towns in this country. Remember, this entire country has roughly 22,000 cities and towns. This entire country. We have 144,000 employees in the solar industry. It is not that hard to get everyone to go to their local city council with a standard set of documents and say, we'd like for you to actually streamline this process. And if someone does that, they're gonna do it 90% of the time. So I think the big challenge we have here is that we have this notion, I don't know when it started, but I assume it's around the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, that Washington, D.C. can sort of solve all of our problems. When you think about the first Earth Day in 1970, 10% of the entire US population actually participated. That's 20 million people. Today, you couldn't get 20,000 people to participate in New York City on Earth Day. And so the big challenge we have is that all of you guys are making money from this industry, and I think that's wonderful. But the fact that you participated here at New York Energy Week matters, and now you have to take that enthusiasm and actually care about it with your friends, with your families, with your city councils, with all these other things. NYSERDA's got a tremendous amount of information on how to do that properly, but it's your sort of effort that gets it done. That's the magic wand. That's why we're here today. That's why solar is so successful, is when you hear NYSERDA or you hear New York State people talk, the political pressure that we bring in the state of New York is 100 times higher than the combined heat and power industry brings in New York. And that's because of you. That's our magic wand. And so just remember that the next time you bitch about something, you're exactly the person that's supposed to go fix it. Right? And so just be careful.
Excellent. So let's open up the floor to questions from the, there's a lot. Okay, so where are the runners? Okay, great. So how about the gentleman up in the front? And please identify yourself.
Hi, Rob Fleischer. Wondered if anybody would comment on at what point is there a mismatch between the length of some of the PPAs that are involved in some of the securitizations? I guess right now they're commonly 20 years, and the rate of change of technology we're seeing in PV, which you talked about before. 5-10 years is a very small period of time, and is 20 years. At what point are we pushing the barrier there where it becomes uncomfortable?
The way most of those contracts are structured, there isn't a whole lot of carve out for replacement of new technology. So once you're in, and you're into the benefit of the contract based on the technology today. So is there some risk that there's better technology out there? Sure, but you've got energy producing assets that are producing income on a fixed contract, so not a huge risk there. I don't think. Other people may feel differently.
I don't think you sit on the sidelines and wait for technology to change. It's like jumping into the S&P. You keep waiting for it the right time. You go in, you look at the long-term benefit. Also, if you look 4 years down the road, if panels become more efficient from 17% to 22%, you can look at the economics, take your panels off the structure, sell them into a second or third market, and then put the new technology up, and you're still operational. You've not lost anything. So I wouldn't wait on the sidelines.
Well, and the one thing that I find fascinating by this conversation is that the technology hasn't changed. Hasn't changed one iota. The technology that we use today for 80% of all solar panels in the United States and globally comes from SolarX in 1973. It's the exact same panel that they produced in 1973. If you look at the panels that were installed 100 kilowatts on Georgetown University in 1982, the same frickin' panels, right? Now, when I joined the solar industry in 1995 with AstroPower, their efficiency, I think it was like 12% or 10, or like 11.8%. Today, those panels are 14.8%. You know, some of the higher efficient panels are higher. Same exact, construction. Dow and DuPont make the same, like pieces of that, same silver backsheet. All that stuff's exactly the same. So for all the people who want to talk about solar, the reason why we're getting $1 trillion so far and another $1 trillion between now and 2020 is because we don't actually change our technology.
Okay. Next question. Blue shirt in the back. Please identify yourself.
Hi, Jeffrey Berman, Pyra Energy Group. The panel hasn't mentioned what I think is one of the most important issues in solar today, which is solar valuation, and especially with net metering. Now, what exactly is the value of a kilowatt hour of solar? Now, under net metering, it is the retail price of electricity. Now, utilities will say that this ignores fixed costs, it shifts costs from solar to non-solar users and things like that. Now, is this an appropriate valuation, or should the solar be valued at something less than the retail price?
Well, I mean, certainly that's something that's going to be looked at through the REV proceeding. We're anticipating that the net metering at the end of our New York Sun run, 2020, 2023, it's going to be, about 9%, 10% of the generation for New York State. And so the net metering limits are becoming an issue, and it's something that the utilities are going to have to look at and make proposals on. I would expect that they will come up with different ways to value PV through that process. We won't be looking at a future that only addresses net metering.
So, I mean, I'm generally the person that everyone hates starting in 2012 who's popularized the value of solar study and worked to get the Minnesota one done. We're about 2 years away from figuring that out. So Travis Bradford here at Columbia University has done extraordinary work to actually figure out what a properly calculated value of solar study looks like. Austin Energy has done great work, so has Georgia Power. California's actually done pretty crappy work in this area, but I think they'll do better. And Minnesota's done great work, right? And so the question is, how do you actually make sure that the utilities basically don't stack the deck and create a bullshit analysis? And how do you make sure the solar industry doesn't stack the deck and create a bullshit analysis, right? And so how do you create something that's academically rigorous? We're in the process of doing that now. We've got 4 or 5 proposals on the table. Everyone's arguing, just like academics like to do. And my sense is that in 2 years' time, we'll actually have a common set of principles on how to calculate the value of solar, such that we can actually, make sure that we're being fair on the grid. But what's amazing is the approaches that I think have been done very fairly have all come out with solar actually being a net subsidizer of their neighbors, right? So Georgia Power's analysis, Austin Energy analysis, and a few others have come out where solar was actually worth more than the retail rate.
Right behind you. Oh.
You want to do this one and then that one?
Yeah.
Hi, David Pianco, Borough Energy. Could you please talk about the possibility of a SREC in New York? Seems to be the Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts seem to all have different programs, and they seem to be working.
I don't foresee it.
I mean, I'll make a statement about SREC programs generally, which is they tend to be a little unstable for 2 reasons. One is they're subject to the market dynamics that push prices up and down. And second, you've got clearly some lack of policy fortitude with respect to SREC programs. And instability is just terribly damaging for a developing industry. If I ask the question, how many people in the room would invest in solar? I assume I get some hands.
Let's do a poll.
It's solar breakfast. Come on, somebody invest in solar. Yeah, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How many of you invest in solar in Spain? Wow, that's more than I expected. Right, you got a program there that was unstable, rug gets pulled out from under the incentives, and it's a market that's just, in a lot of ways, ruined at this point. So, yeah, the SRECs have worked, but there's a limited value to them. A more stable construct is a much better approach, in my view.
I mean, you're absolutely right, but I mean, as you know, my business partner at Sun Edison, Chris Cook, basically created the New Jersey SREC program for Gene Fox, and so I should defend it slightly. I think, look, the reason we passed SREC programs in Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all these other places, is because that's what the politics was open to, right? I mean, I think the tremendous amount of leadership that Governor Cuomo has provided here in setting aside $1 billion to actually do the New York Sun program is laudable. And I think if we had that level of leadership in these other states, we would have actually replicated that program in other states, but we didn't. And a lot of the state legislatures said we want a market-based solution. And you know, for all of the sort of like belly aching back and forth, I mean, New Jersey has met its targets pretty much every year since 2008. So, you know, people are complaining because SRECs have crashed, but that's because we overshot the megawatt target. So, I mean, you know, come on. You know, the same thing's true with Maryland and other places. And so I think the fact that the solar industry, like, you know, wants certainty, yeah, we all want certainty. But ratepayers actually want an affordable, you know, program as well. And so we all have to live within that tension. And I think SRECs have done a fantastic job of providing that service in states where we couldn't actually get the kind of leadership to put $1 billion to the side for the New York Sun program, right? So I like it, and we have 50 states and we'll have 50 different programs, but that's okay.
Next question.
Jigger, you've spoken about the political will necessary to make a change a couple years ago, and for those of us who remember Amory Lovins, 1977 on Capitol Hill, talking about really a manifesto for distributed generation and both the economic as well as the threat to national security of not doing something in terms of all the imports of fossil fuels. And at that moment, he mentioned that the entire budget of DOE equaled, conservation and solar budget equaled 1 day of war games. And at that point, there were games in the Middle East. So now we've seen all the money, trillions of dollars into fossil fuels. So I think that my view is that we do have to talk about a national energy policy. Are we anywhere closer to that? Is it like Tom Steicher, sort of one district at a time to get the guy or the woman in the seat who's going to vote for a rational economic energy policy? Or, I mean, what are we going to do? Because 50 different policies, I think, ultimately are an issue.
Oh, please identify yourself.
Oh, sorry, Miriam Eaves.
I don't know. I don't think they're an issue. I mean, well, look, I think that we have 50 states. I get it. But, you know, California is like the #7 economy in the world. They're doing fantastic. They have a, you know, cap and trade bill. New York's probably like #15 economy in the world. They're doing fantastic too. So I think 70% of Americans basically live under good policy for solar. I mean, I'm okay with that. Look, I think there's this constant sort of magic wand syndrome that I see out there, and it really is problematic because Emory Lovins is fantastic, and I count him as a good friend. But I think you and I both know that his like sort of policy paper doesn't change shit, right? And so what changes stuff is all of us working our butt off, partially because we're mission driven, but partially because we think we're actually going to be able to feed our families based on this industry, right? That's what actually changes the world. We actually have people, whether it's Bubba McDonald down in Georgia, who believes strongly in this stuff now and is the swing vote on the Georgia Public Service Commission, or whether it's the folks in Missouri, or Bobby Jindal in Louisiana. For all the people who probably hate him, the man's, you know, sustained the 50% state tax credit that allows Louisiana to be the #10 solar state in the country right now for the last 4 years running. So we have a tremendous number of champions. The one thing I would say is a problem, and all of you guys, I think, should take responsibility for this, is that we don't reward our champions. So those of you those of us who have champions in the state legislatures, we never break out our checkbook and write them a $100 check to thank them to their campaigns. We should do that. That actually is the way our process works, and you guys should stop being so damn cheap. I think that's a good thing. But secondly, if you do work with League of Conservation Voters and other people, one of our big challenges is that the way that legislature works is that either you need to have a tremendous amount of money so that you can basically give to everyone's campaigns and get their votes that way, or you actually need to have a champion in legislature. And what we oftentimes do in our industry is say, do you like solar power? Yes, I do. Great, you're our champion. That doesn't mean that they're your champion. They may be championing low-income housing, they may be championing something else other than solar. We need to make sure that there's somebody in the legislature who is looking at our issues, and my definition of our issues would be more broadly resource efficiency solutions, whether it's energy efficiency or solar or whatever. And they're the ones who are going to make sure they get on the right committee. They're going to be the ones who actually go to all of their colleagues and say, you should vote for my bill. And when we're actually going to get broadsided by ALEC or somebody, they're the ones that make sure we don't get broadsided, right? And so, I do think that there's a level of chess playing that we're horrible at, and I think we can get a lot better at it. But I think that, we've sort of gotten lazy on that because we really didn't have any opposition from the Koch brothers or anybody else for years. And so we got everything through the legislature because our stuff is motherhood and apple pie, right? But now that we're actually getting real pushback from folks, we actually do need to write the $100 check. We do actually have to make sure that we don't just have people who are pro-environment, but people who are pro-clean energy that are actually championing our issues in the legislature. And that's all the kind of stuff that a responsible industry takes responsibility for.
Okay.
I'd like to, first of all, sitting next to Jigga Shaw reminds me of being in college under my soccer coach. Harder, harder, harder. You go back and work harder. You're inspired. It's not easy. You're going to keep going, do it, and you see the success. But getting back to a national policy, that's a resource. That's an effort. I don't think it's worth taking. They can't get anything passed in Washington. But I do think people follow leaders. And as a state that's successful, it creates jobs. New Jersey created a lot of jobs, great success. California created jobs, clean energy success. New York is coming online to do the exact same thing. So once we see success, people will follow. You don't have to get it passed through. Then the neighboring state will want it. Same way with your own work in North Carolina and the military. The more success breeds success, and people will follow. So West Virginia, 10 years, is going to have a PV power plant, and the coal miners will be actually in clean air making PV modules.
Okay, so unfortunately we are out of time, but we will be around to ask us any questions, so please come up. And let me first introduce Vincenzo Giordano, the co-chair of the Solar Breakfast, and my colleague to wrap things up.
Thank you, Janet, for being such an amazing moderator, and thank you to our panelists, Jigar, Lawrence, Eli, and Karen. Once again, thank you to our host, Morgan Stanley, our sponsor, and a special thank also to Emily, Susie, Tawan, and May for organizing this specific event. I am Vincenzo Giordano. I'm a co-founder and product manager of EnerKnol, the company behind the New York Energy Week. On behalf of the entire EnerKnol team, I'd like to thank you all for coming this morning. We will now have a 30-minute networking session. As Jigar said before, you are this industry. Your enthusiasm is the engine of this industry. So the connections that we'll make today will actually build the relationships that will move forward our industry. So thank you again.
I know.